We're not going to start with a Bible verse, so you're off the hook for the Bible race at the beginning. I want to tell you guys a story that we just went on this mission trip, and I know we've talked a lot about this mission trip, right? I think, so I'm going to take my turn to talk about it a little bit more. And something that happened to me there that kind of got me. You know, it was awesome. Like I said, we saw the kids do things that I didn't think they would care to do. I thought that would make some of them go running. But one of the things we did was, at the end of the week, we had a fun day. All right, we're going whitewater rafting. And the day before we did this, we got a cabin, and everybody's just relaxed. And I'm kind of, chilled out. All week, we've had your guard up. We've prayed for people. We've witnessed to people. We've done everything, done a little work. And so I'm just kind of hanging out, walking around the cabin. This lady approaches me, and she asks me to she goes, give me your 2-minute testimony. So it kind of caught me off guard because, like I said, I thought we're supposed to be relaxing. We're going to go whitewater rafting tomorrow. And I didn't really know what to say. And, as Michael said here a while ago, as a pastor in training, I should be able to give a 25-minute testimony, right? If you ask for 2 minutes, you get 25. I think that's how preachers work, right? It's how it's supposed to be. That I should have been able to, 2 minutes, and she should have told me to shut up and be like, hey, I only asked for 2 minutes. But I asked her to give me a couple minutes. Because like I said, I just really didn't know what to say. And then I did the horrible thing of I never got back with her. I just kind of let it go. And there's a reason. I've always kind of struggled with my testimony. I've gave bits and pieces of it here, but I've always kind of struggled with it because I never felt like I just always felt like it was kind of boring. Like I felt like there was really nothing special about it. My testimony I always felt like was not gonna change people's lives. And that's because most of my life I've been just kind of just your average guy. I've experienced a few things. We've had some struggles. And I've had good times, but nothing really, like I said, really crazy. Always been that average kind of middle of the road guy. Like I'm the guy you don't pick first in kickball, but you're not going to pick last either. I'm kind of that middle guy that, okay, all the good people are gone. Let's go for Jeremy. I'm that guy, right? So I felt bad about this, what I did to this lady. The week's coming back. I was like, man, I should have got back with her. I should have said something to her about my testimony or whatever. And I came across this article, and it was named "Working or Watching." And this guy, he opened up with John 9:4. And that's your first Bible race right there, John 9:4. This is what this article opened up with. And it says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. So then, just like any good article, right, he follows this up with some questions. And he says, do you ever feel like you're spending too much of your life watching? What's your watching to work ratio? Do some math. What's the ratio of working and watching? And just so we're clear, we're not talking about working on locomotives. We're not talking about that kind of work, right? My working on trains does not apply here, but it's specific things for which we were created. These things mandated by the two great commandments. And if you jump over to Matthew 22. We'll read 37 and 39, or through 39. And he says, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." So he hits me with these two verses. We have to work. Night is coming. This is love the Lord your God with everything you got. This is the first commandment. Everything you got, right? And then there's more questions where he says, are you engaging in good works? Or do you find yourself watching? Right? Are you engaging or are we watching? Are you living out the adventures God has for you? Or are we watching others face their fears, their great odds, and pushing themselves beyond their limits rather than doing these things ourselves? This article only took like a minute to read. It was one of those, it was an email that I get from this, I signed up and subscribed and got from this guy, and the reason I did is because it's a minute read. It's a real quick 1 minute devotion, for all us busy people. And like I said, so it takes about a minute to read, but I really couldn't get this article off my mind. This little devotion, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And one of the reasons I couldn't stop thinking about it is because this was my testimony. This was me he was talking about. I had no problem staying comfortable. I always wanted comfort. I'm built for it, right? I'm built for it. I love to be in my chair, either reading a book or watching sports, or something like that. I'm built for comfort. My dad growing up is built for work. Right? We clashed quite a bit because comfort and work don't mix well. And just to show you how I'm built for comfort is some of the worst things I experienced was working on that farm. My dad's idea of fun was, let's get up, let's see if maybe we can build a barn. Maybe we can do it. Let's put up a fence. And this is this is after I got up and took care of the animals, got attacked by chickens in the chicken house trying to retrieve their eggs, and all the above. Then let's go build a barn. Let's go do some landscaping. This is how my dad relaxes, right? I don't believe it, but this is what he tells me. This is how he will relax. So for me, I'm not built that way. So I had to be clever as a kid. So one time he was making me use the wheelbarrow. We were putting a floor in the barn, and I was carrying the dirt in the wheelbarrow, dumping it, and I'm like, man, I really don't want to do this. So my master plan is I turned the wheelbarrow over, I fell asleep in it, And I got caught. And he goes, well, if that's all you're going to do is sleep, why don't you just go in your room? I won. Comfort wins that battle. So I got to go skip to my room and play my video games or whatever it was. But like I said, so I'm built for comfort. And this was how I wanted to live my life. I felt like God should grant me this, right? Why would he make me this way? I felt like, and we talked about it a little bit in Bible study, I maybe was kind of on the border of that name it, claim it kind of stuff. Like, God, just make it to where I don't have to work anymore. I'll go to church more. If I'm not working, I'll do some more things for you, Lord. And and we could laugh, but this was kind of my prayers a lot of times. Was like, I don't want anything to happen to me. I don't want to experience anything bad. I want to be comfortable. I want to be comfortable. I don't want to have to work. I don't have to do any of this stuff. But we're going to go to I just labeled this the Pam Combs section because she stole this from me. She was probably in my notes whenever I was turning my back, but here's the crazy thing about God is He doesn't call us to be comfortable. As much as I, hate to say it, as I hate to preach it, but He doesn't call us to be comfortable. And you can see this throughout the Bible. Like, I want a good life. I want to have it easy. But if you open the Bible, there is nothing comfortable about people like Moses. I think Moses was trying to do the same thing I was trying to do. I think he was trying to escape Egypt and just kind of, live his life. And God called him back and said, go face the Pharaoh. There's nothing comfortable about facing the Pharaoh. Or Noah. There's definitely nothing comfortable about building a boat on dry land. Yeah, and just nothing comfortable about that. There wasn't nothing comfortable for Joseph when he spent all that time in prison. Just because his brothers didn't like him. We got that sibling rivalry going on there that cost him some of his life in prison. There's nothing comfortable about my favorite guy in the Bible, David. There's nothing comfortable about facing a giant when you're a young man with no battle experience. And then there was nothing comfortable about running from a king that wanted your head because you were next in line. You were going to take his job, and he did not appreciate that. There was nothing comfortable about being one of the 12 disciples. Or Paul. These guys faced ridicule, jail time, beatings, and for the most part, most of them, death. We talked about that a little bit too. Most of these guys were martyred for their faith. So there's nothing comfortable about that. Jesus himself, who leads by example. There's nothing comfortable about fasting 40 days in a desert. There's nothing comfortable about that. Then there's also nothing comfortable about Satan himself tempting you after you haven't eaten for 40 days and 40 nights and you're exhausted. There's nothing comfortable about that. So why do I get to be comfortable, right? Why do I get maybe I'll get that nice golden lazy boy up in heaven but that's not what God calls us to do. He doesn't call us to be comfortable. So, and I believe the reason for this is how we grow, right? This is part of God's plan. As weird as it sounds, this comfort thing is part of God's plan. Because just if we go back to Joseph, if Joseph didn't have those uncomfortable situations, he couldn't have led Egypt. He couldn't have saved Egypt and his family from the famine. Moses, he wouldn't have saved that nation if he wanted to be comfortable. Just for a couple, we can go down the list of these people that, if they chose comfort over work, then where would we have been? Or where would these people have been? So it helps us grow. You don't get stronger if you don't work out. You don't learn how to read if you don't practice reading. Just real basic stuff, right? So we don't get closer to God if we don't do the work. So, and it also, that draws us closer to Him. Because for me, and I'm pretty sure it could be most everybody's testimony too, the closer I get to God, no matter what happens, the happier I am. And that's what's crazy. No matter what happens, if I'm close to God, that's really all that matters. So, I'm going to do this 2-minute testimony for you guys. So it might be longer than 2 minutes. I did not time it. So, forgive me if anybody's got the stopwatch. You're ready, set, go. And so I was around 12 when I started going to church. I've told that part of my testimony where I was saved at a Jim Wilson crusade when I was 12 in a gymnasium at South Central High School. And I remember the weirdest thing that ever happened to me in my life was I felt like I was going to die if I didn't go down there. Oddly enough, I felt that way. I'm 12 years old, and I just remember thinking that. I'm sitting there, and they're calling people down. I don't really know anything about Jesus at this point in my life. I really don't. Most people just told me, yeah, there's a God. Jesus did this. Jesus did that. And that's really all I got from my family at the time. So I remember them saying, you come down here, you pray, and you can receive Jesus. I don't know if I fully even understood what that meant at the time. But I remember thinking, if I don't go down there right now, I'm dead. I'm dead. And oddly enough, I walked down there to my death that day. So, like I said, around 12, I was saved. We started going to church. My mom was pretty instrumental in that, got me involved in the youth group. And while I was in this youth group, I had a pastor that confronted me and said, I really feel like you have a gifting and you're going to be a preacher, teacher kind of person. I'm like, yeah, right. We'll see if he was right at the end of this. But so this sent me into what I like to call my Jonah phase, where I hit the ground running the opposite direction of where I was supposed to go. I spent my teens and early adulthood, like I said, running from this calling because it wasn't comfortable. It made me uncomfortable to stand up here and speak and talk in front of people. It still kind of does. It's not my favorite thing in the world. But, it was uncomfortable, so I did what I had to do. I ran. And I decided once I became 18 and I was a big adult guy that now I could get away. I could say, it's been nice, God. We had our nice little moments. You made me uncomfortable, so now I gotta bounce. And I tried that. At this one point, I decided, like I said, I was done with church and everything. But thank God he had other plans. God did this other thing also that I didn't realize as it was going on. God was pretty tricky with me because he always seemed to have people placed in my life. It's weird, huh? He always had people placed in my life that kind of fought against what I wanted. When I was done with church, he had people in my life being like, hey, you should probably go back to church. You should probably go back to church. And, there was people that wouldn't give up on me. I've been blessed with family, friends that probably put up with way more than they should have from me and didn't give up. I've talked about me and Jacqueline and our testimony a little bit together with our marriage, but that's the one thing that really destroyed me was when I asked her, why didn't you leave? I was not making her comfortable in our marriage at one point. So I'm like, why in the world would you stay? Because that's what I knew. If it wasn't comfortable, I'm out. I understand that. So why did you stay? And she said that to me. She goes, well, I saw the guy you could be. And that'll make you feel about yay big. It got me. It destroyed me. So God's always had people in my life. It was my mom for a long time. And then it was Coy. And then JJ and his family. Jacqueline. And this church. A lot of people in this church, I felt like probably should have, probably could have gave up on me, and I couldn't have blamed him. So God was always putting people in my life to counteract the kind of dumb stuff I wanted to do, right? So, and it wasn't until I had a moment where I found myself probably in one of the darkest places I've ever been in my life. And this wasn't that long ago. Because see, when these people got me back to church, I did this other thing. Where I was like, well, if I'm not going to be comfortable, if I have to go to church, maybe I'll just play games. I'm good at that. Playing mind games with people and stuff like that. I'm pretty clever. I'm just going to play games with God. I'll be that guy. Once again, if I have to come to church, I'm going to try to be as comfortable as I can. Right? Just be as comfortable as I can. So there was a lot of times where I'd sit back there or at the other church, and, I'm not the guy that's going to volunteer. I'm not the guy that you're going to come to for prayer. I'm not that guy you're going to approach. I don't want to be that guy. That's what I was always telling myself. I don't want to be that guy that gets put in an uncomfortable situation. And once again, God was still doing this thing where he was putting things in my life. Boom, boom, boom. Coy's like, hey, you want to help out with the youth group? I guess, but I'm not teaching. There's no way. Not even really that fond of kids. So I'm not going to teach. I'll show up, I'll sit and listen to you, and I'll be comfortable. Because you know what the youth group did? It got me out of church and back there. So I thought, like I said, because I'm clever, right? I'm clever. So that got me out of the sermons a lot of times. Was I just sit back there and listen to Coy ramble on a little bit, and just be like, amen. So, also, I did this thing where I was on the praise team, and as a lot of you know, I always kind of wanted to be a rock star, wanted to play drums and be in a band and travel the world and do all these great things. But once again, God's clever, more clever than me if you haven't figured that out yet. He gave me the opportunity to be on the praise team and learn about worship and this thing called the Holy Spirit and all of this, just all this weird stuff, right? So, like I said, so here I find myself skipping out on the sermon because I'm working with the youth, playing on the praise team because, like I said, I like to play drums. So, but once again, God had other plans. As clever as I think I am, I found myself on the praise team, having a great time. It's different. There was something different about praise music. I don't know what it is, but there's something different about it. And then I find myself teaching the youth. I wasn't going to do that. Like I said, I don't even like kids. But I find myself teaching the youth now. And I was like, okay, all right, God, that's fine. I could probably get comfortable doing that. Because, once again, I'm kind of in the back there, teaching the youth, do the best I can, but it got to the point where maybe that was comfortable for me. And God said, why don't you come out and preach? Grant and Coy both gave me the opportunity to preach like every time there was a fifth Sunday. I would get to preach. And at first I'm like, no. There's no way. There's just no way I could go up there in front of Grant. In front of Coy. In front of Pam. And what am I going to tell them that they don't already know, right? What am I going to say? Steve's looking at me like, why don't you get Coy back? And, or let's get Grant back or whatever. But I was like, what am I going to say to these people? How am I going to teach them about the Bible? They're teaching me. I'm learning from them. But like I said, God had other plans, and I wound up doing this for a while. And then came that time. I hit a moment where it was a pretty dark time for me. It pulled me away from the church again for a while, and it made me really question everything. And not in a good way. Like question man, is this stuff real? The questions of why in the world am I wasting my time going to church? Why am I wasting my time with God? And it was, like I said, it was a pretty dark time. And when I finally got through that, or when God finally got me through that, and I came back, I tried to do my same old tricks. It's I'll come back. I ain't doing nothing. And once again, if you haven't noticed the theme yet, God had other plans for me. I went from a guy that was not going to do anything to, at one moment, I had to stop and tell myself, and this was God saying, if you're going to come here and you're going to do this stuff, shouldn't you be all in? And I'm kind of ashamed to say I'd never really thought about that too much, I kind of felt like, well, I did some stuff. I've helped out with the youth. I've taught the youth. I've been on the praise team. And he's like, well, why don't you try being all in? And I remember sitting right back there, right behind where Jack's sitting, being comfortable. It's a nice seat. Being comfortable. And hearing that and him saying, why don't you be all in? And the weirdest thing happened. Instead of playing games with God and maybe bucking a little bit, I was like, I've tried everything else. I've tried comfort. I've tried not believing. And I've tried everything in between. Why not try all in, right? Because I was a mess at that point in my life. The only play I had was to push everything all in and say, all right, let's do this. And it wasn't until I did that I started seeing things move in my life. And it started off small. I just started off filming because COVID, filming a little bit, putting stuff on the YouTubes. Started helping Jay with communion. I could pass a plate around pretty good. Started off kind of small behind the scenes, stuff like that. And then it's elevated to work on this, help out with the sound stuff every once in a while. I help out wherever I'm needed, basically. And, I've gotten this thing, pastors in training. And I know we preach this to you guys a lot, and maybe you're sick of hearing it, but it is the one thing that changed my life for the better. And it was when I got into pastors in training, Coy, once again, somebody God put in my life, said, if you're going to do this, this is how it's done. You have to study. You have to pray consistently. This is not just me playing games with God where if I need something, oh, Lord, hey, it's me again. Consistently study, pray. That's what you have to do. Fast. All this stuff. That's okay. I'm at this point. I'm Jim Carrey in Yes Man, if you've ever seen that movie. Where at a point in this movie, he just starts saying yes to everything. And that's how I wanted to approach it. When me being all in was me saying yes to opportunities. And this is what changed my life, is when I started taking God serious. And like I said, He's blessed me with being able to work with the youth, being on the praise team, but He's also blessed me in working in Emmaus walks. I've worked RECs. I've gotten the pleasure of, going into prisons and jails and either playing music or telling them about the gospel. I get to preach a little bit. You know, I get to preach a little bit. I get to be part of pastors in training. And right after this, I'm going to go to the juvenile detention center. You know, I get to tell young men and women that are in this horrible place about God. You know, and that doesn't happen when you're playing games. That doesn't happen when you're comfortable. So, is that 2 minutes? 2? The pastor's 2 minutes, right? That was the coy 2 minutes. So, I can't wait to see what God has for me in the future. So, with that being said, we'll have the praise team come up. And I want to read you guys Ephesians 1:4. It says, "For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight in love." Now, this 1 minute article that we talked about, he ends it with this, and I thought it was appropriate. It says, "When God dreamt about you so long ago, did he dream of you watching others live out their great stories, but not you? Of course not. He dreamt of a great story for you too. Of course he has a story he cannot wait to share with you right now." And as the praise team plays, you know, I would encourage you. Hopefully this message has been encouraging to you that be all in. Don't worry about comfort. You know, God has a story, an adventure. You put it that way, nerd in me loves that. It has an adventure. You know, I could be Bilbo Baggins going on an adventure. But he's got something for you. And I know that's basic Christian 101 stuff. But sometimes we can let that stuff slide and forget. I sure did. So God's got a story, and he wants you to be part of it. Let's pray. Father, I just pray right now, Lord, that you would just be with each and every person here. I pray that you would just help them to be all in. Help them to go live their adventure, their story, and may you be glorified in that. Amen.